From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. First, the headlines. Biden appears to accuse Putin of genocide in Ukraine. Clashes rock West Bank as Palestinian attacker killed. Indian film banned in Kuwait and Qatar over Islamophobia. At least 29 injured in New York shooting. Undetonated devices found. White House warns of extraordinarily elevated U.S. inflation. And Canada issues eat stamp. Our top story tonight. On Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden appeared to accuse Russian President Vladimir Putin of genocide during a speech about gasoline prices. Speaking in Iowa, Biden said a family's budget and ability to fill up their tank should not hinge on whether a dictator declares war and commits genocide half a world away. The Biden administration has blamed sharp rises at U.S. gas stations on Putin's invasion of neighboring Ukraine. Russian troops have been accused of committing atrocities against civilians. Russian state television pundits have suggested exacting revenge on the U.S. for its support of the Ukrainian government and crippling economic sanctions. The Daily Beast's Julia Davis reports the linchpin of this revenge plan is getting former President Donald Trump reelected in 2024. Russian political scientist Malik Dudakov recently urged the Russian government to openly help Trump through public relations stunts on his behalf. He suggested inviting Trump, before he announces a bid for the presidency, to a future summit in liberated Mariupol. Analyst Dmitry Drobnitsky also supported getting Trump back in the White House. Drobnitsky floated the idea of having Trump pick Tulsi Gabbard as his running mate. Clashes between Israeli soldiers and Palestinians rocked the West Bank city of Jenin on Tuesday. The violence sparked after a Palestinian stabbed a police officer in Israel before being shot dead. Israeli troops launched a fourth day of operations around Jenin after an assailant from the city shot and killed 3 people in a Tel Aviv bar last week. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett visited the reopened bar after the attack. The shooting sparked an all-night manhunt before the suspected shooter was killed in a firefight. Jenin residents told AFP new fighting broke out after multiple gun battles in recent days. Palestinian news agency Wafa said clashes erupted between young Palestinian men and Israeli soldiers who fired live bullets, stun grenades, and tear gas. UN Special Rapporteur for the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory, Michael Lynk, is going to join us later tonight in our show, so keep watching Muslim News. On Monday, Iran's government questioned Washington's resolve to reach an agreement restoring the 2015 nuclear deal. Former President Donald Trump canceled the deal in 2018 and reimposed all U.S. sanctions on Iran. Key sticking points remain unresolved after talks halted last month. Iran has been negotiating for a year with France, Germany, Britain, Russia, and China, and indirectly with the United States to revive the deal. Negotiations in the Austrian capital Vienna aim to return the U.S. to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That deal includes lifting sanctions on Iran and ensuring Tehran's full compliance with its commitments. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh said the U.S. hasn't shown the necessary will to reach an agreement. On Monday, United Nations Special Envoy Hans Grunberg began his first official visit to Yemen's rebel-held capital, Sana'a. Grunberg's arrival comes after an April 2nd ceasefire that the country's warring parties have accused each other of violating. The Swedish diplomat is scheduled to meet Houthi rebel officials during the visit. Grunberg's office tweeted that he was looking forward to engaging with the Houthi leadership on implementing and strengthening the truce. Iran-backed Houthi insurgents took control of Sana'a in 2014. It prompted a Saudi-led coalition's military intervention the following year. The conflict has triggered what the UN calls the world's worst humanitarian crisis. A 2-month ceasefire declared at the start of Ramadan has largely held. The Indian film Beast has been banned in Kuwait and Qatar due to its reportedly stereotypical depiction of Muslims as terrorists and its dialogues against Pakistan. The Tamil language film, described as an action comedy, stars Talapati Vijay and Pooja Hegde. Vijay plays a government intelligence agent stuck in a mall with terrorists. India's Tamil Nadu Muslim League has condemned the film and demanded it should not be released in that state. Times of India reported that the ban in Qatar may affect box office receipts in the Gulf region, the second largest audience for Indian cinema. Indians make up the largest group of expat workers in Qatar, around 25% of the population. U.S.-based civil rights, faith groups, and advocates have condemned a federal commission being pressured to dilute its reporting on religious persecution in India. In a letter to the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, these groups and individuals urged it to withstand pressure from U.S.-based Hindu nationalists. The letter contends certain parties are attempting to influence USCIRF's commissioners and officials. They have been urged to exclude any mention of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi or his Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party from the Commission's latest report. The letter's signatories recommend the U.S. State Department designate India as a country of particular concern. That's the harshest label for the world's worst persecutors of religious minorities. USCIRF's annual report cataloging the state of religious freedom worldwide will be released April 25th. Canada Post has released its fourth Eid stamp since 2017. It is among several annual stamp issues marking events of importance to Canada's culturally diverse population. Eid festivals this year begin in early May and early July. They're celebrated by more than 1 million Muslims in Canada and millions more worldwide. Other religious festivals recognized with stamps include Diwali, Hanukkah, and Christmas. The Eid stamp was designed by Soapbox Design of Toronto. It features a lantern casting colorful patterns of dappled light. Designer Richard Narlipetta used a montage of photographs and illustrations to create layers of texture and background color in the stamp. We're bringing updates on the New York City subway shooting and other domestic news stories after this break, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. Brothers and sisters, we all watch the Allahu Akbar lady from India. She's amazing, isn't she? She's neither compromising her hijab nor her education. She's standing tall. We must stand with her. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect her. But it is not just hijab, brothers and sisters. Indian Muslims are facing genocide.
Genocide that we face in India is not a new phenomenon. India has had several genocides.
They are attacked every day. Even the Indian government admits there has been more than 1,800 organized attacks on Muslims, but they call it riot. 660 people are hanged to death in India, lynched in broad daylight, sometimes just because they were accused of eating beef. Yes, accusation of eating beef can kill a human being in India. We cannot remain silent, can we? Alhamdulillah, OIC has spoken, that is good, but why in the world United Nations is silent? The UN has a responsibility to protect. It has a duty to prevent genocide. Sisters and brothers, we must stand with Indian Muslims and other minorities. We are free, they are not. We are not attacked, they are under attack day and night. Let's do our job. I have signed this UN petition. I ask you to sign it now. Thank you so much.
Friends, our world is pulling together like never before. We're making huge sacrifices to keep one another safe. Scientists are working non-stop to develop COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A vaccine will get our economies moving. It will tell our loved ones we're safe again. But we have challenges we must address. Right now, huge pharmaceutical companies are keeping the vaccine research a secret. They're deciding how many vaccines get made, how much to charge for them, and who gets vaccinated. This will no doubt leave billions of people behind. Pharma companies are putting profit, not people, first. Yet, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is funding their work. We cannot let the CEOs of a handful of pharmaceutical companies decide our future. We need a vaccine that everyone can have free of charge, no matter where you live or whether you're rich or you're poor. We need companies to share all their research so we can make enough safe vaccines for everyone. We need a vaccine owned by all of us. To end this COVID-19 pandemic, we need to pull together once more.
Welcome back. A 62-year-old man is suspected of setting off smoke grenades in a crowded New York City subway car yesterday and then opening fire, police said. At least 29 people were injured in the attack, and police have named a person of interest. Police said the suspect, Frank R. James, had rented a U-Haul van in Philadelphia. A key to the van was found in a collection of items on the train that police believe belonged to the gunman. Items included a Glock 9mm handgun, 3 ammunition magazines, a hatchet, fireworks, and a liquid believed to be gasoline. Police said the incident was not being investigated as an act of terrorism.
I was dropping off my kid in one of the schools right on the avenues, which is right there on 29th Street in front of the precinct. And I was trying to figure out what had happened when I dropped them off. I saw people running from 25th Street and 36th Street train station both ways without any direction, with blood all over them, and trying to figure out where's the smoke coming from. This usually doesn't happen around here. I'm a little shocked, and I'm hoping that it gets better because I'm noticing it's happening all over New York City. So I hope that around here, especially, there is tons of schools right on the avenues, that this doesn't happen anymore and they are all captured.
On Monday, the White House warned that U.S. inflation in March is likely to be extraordinarily elevated. The statement comes ahead of the Department of Labor's release of the Consumer Price Index. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki blamed elevated costs on Russia's war on Ukraine. She added the Biden administration needs to do more to reduce costs for the American people. Psaki said the Labor Department's last report, reflecting data from February, did not largely include gas price jumps prompted by the Russian assault. The war has sent gas prices soaring to record highs across the U.S. Psaki said it has also disrupted global energy and food markets. The Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, condemned the alleged vandalism of a Maryland Muslim candidate's campaign signs. The nation's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization urged anyone with information to contact Baltimore County Police. Shazia Shah of Catonsville is a candidate for the Maryland House of Delegates. Shah, who wears a hijab, told CAIR at least 2 campaign lawn signs were defaced. Images of her were cut out, but images of another candidate on the sign, Ilyas Chohan, running for a state Senate seat in Maryland, remained intact. Shah also reported receiving a hate call. On Tuesday, 2 Illinois men were sentenced in connection with the 2017 bombing of Dar al-Faruq Islamic Center in Bloomington, Minnesota. Michael McWhorter and Joe Morris received 190 months and 170 months in prison, respectively. They were convicted of firearms violations, arson, use of a destructive device, and federal civil rights violations. Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division said the bombing instilled fear in an entire faith community. The men confessed their crimes and helped prosecute the person who led them to join a far-reaching criminal conspiracy rooted in white supremacy, she said. Court documents show Emily Claire Harry, also known as Michael Harry, established the militia group the White Rabbits in Clarence, Illinois in the summer of 2017. Harry recruited McWhorter and Morris to join the militia. On Monday, the Austin chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, condemned an alleged hate crime at Texas State University last month. A Muslim student was the target of a suspected hate crime and assault reported at the campus in late March. The alleged March 31st incident wasn't reported to campus police until April 6, the San Marcos Corridor News reported. The female student was jogging when she was approached by an unknown man who allegedly tried to remove her hijab. The man also allegedly made derogatory remarks about the woman's nationality and religion, according to a CAIR Austin news release. CAIR Austin Executive Director Faizan Sayed called for a swift and thorough investigation. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks? Racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime. And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September. I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table. I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. UN Special Rapporteur for the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory is joining Edward Ahmed Mitchell for a detailed conversation. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Samana. Greatly appreciated. And now we'd like to have a very special conversation with a very special human rights leader. We're going to be discussing today the state of affairs in Israel and Palestine with Michael Lynk, who many of you may know is not only an academic, a professor, but over the past 6 years has served as the Special Rapporteur for the United Nations on Israel-Palestine. We're very happy to have him here with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Lynk. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Great pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And Mr. Lynk is also a professor in Canada. He serves as an associate professor at the University of Western Ontario. But as I mentioned, over the past several years, he has had a very big job. And I'd like to ask him to tell us about his reflections on the work he's done in Israel-Palestine over the past several years as he prepares to depart his position, complete his term of service. Looking back, what are your thoughts? Challenges you faced, any progress you've seen, hopes for the future? Just give us your rear view look as you're preparing to switch up roles here.
Sure. I began this position 6 years ago in the beginning of May 2016. And I had, I guess, when I became Special Rapporteur, I had great hopes that the reports that I would write, the statements I would issue, the commentary that I would offer would play a influential role in persuading the international community to end its remarkable passivity towards Israel and the question of accountability. Israel has been many times named in UN resolutions at the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the Human Rights Council as being in violation of international law and of previous direction coming from the United Nations in terms of its occupation of the Palestinian territory. So I issued a number of reports where I pointed out the big gap between promise and performance, between what the UN and the international community had said Israel must be doing and what Israel was actually doing on the ground. And so as I began to look in the rearview mirror, as you've said, 6 years after having assumed this position in the final few weeks of my mandate, I think I'm content with the work that I've done. I think I've been tough and bold with respect to my statements regarding both the role of Israel in human rights abuses in the occupied Palestinian territory and the role of the international community in giving, if you like, implicit permission for this occupation to continue. But I'm leaving deeply discouraged that the United Nations and the international community is so selective in what resolutions it's going to enforce and what resolutions it's going to withhold enforcement from. There are over 70 Security Council resolutions that have been adopted by the Security Council since the early 1970s regarding Israel's occupation. Virtually none of them have been put into place. And this is the primary reason why this occupation continues after 55 years.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Lynk. What were some of the challenges you faced in doing your work? This is not an easy position to be in. Anytime someone is commenting on human rights violations in this part of the world, they take some flack. Can you tell us more about some of the challenges you faced in this work and how you managed to overcome them?
Sure. There are two main challenges. First is that Israel did not allow me to enter into the occupied territories or to Israel. Each spring, I would write to the Israeli permanent mission in Geneva, asking for permission to be able to visit Israel and the occupied territories in my capacity as Special Rapporteur, and I got back with silence. Israel never gave a green light for me to go. It was criticized repeatedly at the Human Rights Council for its refusal to permit me to travel to the occupied territories. So what I did was go to Amman, Jordan, where UN officials in Palestine and human rights organizations in Palestine would come across the Jordan River and meet me and brief me in Amman. That's a second best plan, if you like, a plan B. It would have been wonderful to be able to go to the occupied Palestinian territories, to actually see the changes that are ongoing on the ground, and to be able to speak to those who are victims of human rights abuses directly. As it is, there is a very strong and vibrant community of human rights organizations, both in Israel and in Palestine, whose excellent reporting I have relied upon heavily over the last 6 years to be able to do my work. So I think my reports are well informed. I think my reports are insightful and do take account of the various human rights trends that have been going on there, but nothing would have substituted for the ability to actually go there. The second issue is just simply there are both Israel and a number of organizations that support the Israeli occupation are persistent critics of both my position as well as the United Nations in general. I've got to say, though, while I took those criticisms seriously in the beginning, I began to realize that there was no moral or legal or political content to them. They weren't helping in terms of having an honest and informed exchange back and forth. Their differences were simply to be able to defend the occupation and criticize, or one might even use the word smear, those who were critical of Israel's occupation. So that didn't play an enormous role, I think, in the end on how I conducted myself as Special Rapporteur.
Understood. So you were, doing this work for 6 years, and in that time you've noticed, and I'm sure observed, some trends. It sounds like not going in the right direction. What would you say is the difference between the situation now in the occupied Palestinian territories compared to when you first started?
Virtually every major indicator, things have gotten worse. One primary indicator is the number of settlements and Israeli settlers living in the occupied Palestinian territory in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. When I became Special Rapporteur in 2016, there were approximately 380,000 or 390,000 settlers. Today, there are 480,000, and the settlement population is growing from between 20 to 25,000 settlers per year. It's hard to imagine how a two-state solution, a genuine two-state solution with a viable, contiguous, prosperous Palestinian state can emerge with that density of settlers living on their land. You look at any of the other main statistics, the degree of violence that Israel needs in order to be able to maintain the occupation is steadily increasing. 2021 was the highest number of deaths since 2014 of Palestinians killed by violence by Israel. 2021 was the highest number of settler violence directed towards Palestinians and towards their property since these statistics began to be first compiled around 2008. There is no peace process. There is no prospects for any peace process in the foreseeable future. So on virtually any indicator that you want to be able to look at, things have gotten worse. This is a more entrenched occupation than ever, which leads me to my last report, which I've just issued in March, where I said because of the structure and institutions that are there to ensure the domination and subjugation of one racial national group over another, this occupation has become indistinguishable from apartheid.
Well, that brings me to my next question, because we've seen B'Tselem, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International reach the same conclusion that the crime of apartheid is being committed in this situation. And obviously, we've seen a lot of criticism of them, not based on the substance of what they said, as far as I can tell, just kind of vitriolic attacks on them. Can you go into a little bit of detail about why you concluded that essentially apartheid is being practiced against the Palestinian people?
Sure. Very good question. When I began Special Rapporteur 6 years ago, I had kind of taken a silent vow to myself I'm not going to use the term apartheid because I think it just chases away my ability to speak with diplomats, with political decision makers, and with the media about this. They see this word as being politically charged and explosive, and it winds up diverting the conversation about how to end the occupation and realize Palestinian self-determination. But I began to realize after about 4 years in this position that this occupation wasn't temporary, it wasn't indefinite, it was permanent. Israel was building its occupation not with wood as it's required to, but with concrete, and that a dominating structure with two different baskets of rights, substantial rights for the 700,000 Israeli settlers, Jewish settlers living in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, who had all of the rights, privileges, and benefits of Israeli citizenship, and then the living conditions of Palestinians living in Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank, where they had virtually no political rights, no recognized or enforceable international rights to wind up protecting them, where their land was being confiscated, where they were being barricaded behind walls and checkpoints. The vast difference between how Israeli Jewish settlers lived and how Palestinians lived in the same territory, in the same political space, led me to conclude that there is no other word or framework for understanding the situation but apartheid. If you can find a better term and a better framework for illustrating what is going on now in the occupied Palestinian territory, I'd welcome your suggestions or recommendations, but I cannot find a better word. I then began to read all of these Palestinian, Israeli, and international reports, well documented, well researched, dense in facts, very thoughtfully argued, and I was persuaded by them, which is what led me to be able to issue my final report 3 weeks ago to the Human Rights Council, where I have also concluded that, at least within the occupied Palestinian territory, this is apartheid. When you have two different groups, racial groups of peoples living in the same political and geographic space with two different dramatically different accesses to rights, there is really no other word or framework to be able to use. The poorest Israeli settlement and settlers have more rights and a better living condition than the richest Palestinian communities in the occupied territories.
So, Mr. Lynk, let me ask you this, and you may not be able to answer this, but all that being said, where do you think this is going? Because, when I think back to South Africa and the apartheid movement there, there was international pressure building on South Africa over time. There were some reasons why it seemed inevitable that that system just could not persist. But I don't know, do you see that? How do you see this ending? If everything you've said is accurate, and the Israeli government shows no indication of changing course, there's not a significant international pressure outside of human rights groups, making these observations. For your successor in this role, if there is one, 6 years from now, where is this thing going?
I do have a successor. She was chosen 2 weeks ago by the Human Rights Council. She's a prominent Italian human rights lawyer who's lived in Jerusalem, who's written an excellent book on Palestinian refugees and international law. So she will be, I think, just a wonderful special rapporteur coming after me. In terms of where this is going, I have no good news to be able to report to you. Israeli leaders have publicly moved well past a two-state solution. The reality on the ground with these 300 settlements and 700,000 settlers has moved well beyond a two-state solution. The international community, certainly leading diplomatic and political decision makers, keep on repeating the mantra of a two-state solution. But a two-state solution, in my mind, has become a political unicorn. It's a form of time travel because no one can explain, who defends the idea of a two-state solution anymore, how that's possible, given the Israeli facts on the ground. But Israel doesn't mind the international community continuing to use the term two-state solution, because it pretends as if it's still possible to create one, even as Israel thickens its presence in the occupied territories to the point where a two-state solution is really putting in a blood transfer into a corpse. As long as the international community leads everybody to believe it's possible, when it's not anymore, Israel is in a good position. How does this end? You've cited South Africa. And the reasons why apartheid finally collapsed in South Africa were because of intense international pressure coming from civil society in throughout the world. It came from trade embargoes and sanctions against South Africa, and as well, because the Black South Africans rose up and created an unimaginable situation where the continuation of apartheid could not be managed by the white minority regime. I don't see any other way than following the South African path, unfortunately, for realizing Palestinian self-determination. It's going to have to be a vigorous and principled intervention by the international community, which will only come if civil societies in each of those countries wind up putting pressure on their governments to finally say, Israel, this is not a temporary occupation. Israel has every intention of making this permanent, and this has now become apartheid. It's going to also come with the Palestinian people themselves finding creative ways to make the occupation unmanageable. I hope it can be done through civil disobedience and peaceful resistance to the Israeli occupation. I fear that if that's not possible, or the world keeps on putting blockades to every attempt by the Palestinians to hold Israel accountable, then this is going to degenerate into a bloody violence between Israelis and Palestinians, which will make the creation of a new, prosperous, shared future between the two all that much more difficult.
Yeah. And in fact, we have seen some horrific violence happening on the ground there. I mean, it seems to always be happening, but especially the past few weeks, we've seen Palestinians being killed. Just a Palestinian lawyer was shot and killed yesterday. And there were attacks also in Israel, killing Israeli civilians. Can you briefly update us on what's happening on the ground right now, and why there's been this, is this an uptick in violence, or is this just the latest in a long line of violence that's been occurring in the region?
Well, it's unfortunately a continuation of a long line of violence. I mean, the death rate or the death ratio between Palestinians killed by Israeli violence and Israelis killed by Palestinian violence is in the ratio of around 22 to 1. That's not saying that, and I'm not saying, I want to make sure that everybody knows that this would be better if more Israelis were killed. I don't want anybody to be killed or dying, but Palestinians are paying in particular a horrendous cost in both in lives and in serious injuries as a result of the occupation. I repeat what I said before, is that the level of violence, in order for Israel to maintain the occupation, is trending higher and higher. So right now, over the past few weeks, there's been tension, in part because we have the coincidence of Ramadan and Passover occurring. There's great tension in East Jerusalem because of attempts by settler groups to remove Palestinians living in the homes they've been in for the last 70 some years in East Jerusalem, and taking these homes and these neighborhoods over for exclusive Jewish settlement. In Gaza, the economy is flat on its back, and virtually all the living indicators we would have about how life is there is getting worse. And land in the West Bank continues to be confiscated. Israel enables more Jewish outposts, new settlements to be created, and with, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, with 20 to 25,000 more settlers each year, the Palestinians are feeling abandoned. They see no hope with respect to a political process, and they probably, and so many of them are critical of their own leadership for not having a viable, coherent strategy of how to end the occupation.
Professor Lynk, I want to thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, your experiences with us today. The first step towards fixing a problem is understanding a problem. And so I think your work over the past 6 years has shed a light on what is happening there. We appreciate you and your time today, and we look forward to communicating with you in the future, God willing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you, Professor. And Samana, we'll toss it back to you.
Thank you, Edward. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.